Hello and welcome to the 105. I'm Cooper Petagna. That's 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting, Andrew Ivins. We got a great show for you today. Moving day in the SEC. Big wins for Ole Miss, Alabama. Also, Billy Napier back for another year. The boys will give our thoughts on that. And then we'll get into silly season. It's that time of year where things get a little silly. Guys wavering from commitments. We'll jump into that as well. But Drew, I got to ask, a lot going on in the SEC. What's your biggest takeaway from this weekend?
I mean, a big weekend of football. Cooper, I think the one question I have for my big takeaway is, does Georgia have a major problem at quarterback? And we've talked about Carson Beck before, his issues with the turnovers, the interceptions. But I think if we try to spin this forward, okay, 2025, 2026 and beyond, we keep thinking of Georgia as the king of college football. I think they got an issue. And my question to you, when you think about Georgia, right, we know that Carson Beck off to the NFL draft. Do you think Georgia's 2025 quarterback is on the current roster? Because I think you can make a case that that person is not.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The other thing that I was thinking of is, it wasn't long ago when we were thinking that Dylan Raiola, the former five-star, was going to be the future quarterback for Georgia. Now you look at that quarterback room, Drew. You look at guys like redshirt sophomore Gunnar Stockton, redshirt freshman Jaden Rashada, who transferred from Arizona State, Ryan Puglisi, another guy in the top 247 that we were high on, Drew. If I had to guess right now, I would say that answer is no. I think Georgia's going to be aggressive in the portal. I think we've seen that in the past. And Carson Beck was a guy that they had a lot of confidence in going into this season. I mean, there were some media members out there that thought Carson Beck would have had probably a better than not shot to end up as a day one draft choice last year. We'll even see if that happens this year. So it's been up and down, Drew. But yeah, if you're Georgia, I think going into this offseason, Mike Bobo, Kirby Smart, they're back to the drawing board and say, how can we get a little bit more dynamic at this position? Because as you always bring up, without Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, this is not the same team. They're not in 12 personnel as much, and they just don't seem like they have the same comfort level or identity. And obviously, Drew, it's shown up this year, 2 losses already before we get into the thick of things in the middle of November.
Yeah, Coop, I mean, Carson Beck against Ole Miss, 20-31 passing, 186 yards. Here's the numbers that jump out to me. The offense ran 33 times for just 59 yards. That's 1.8 yards per attempt. What happens when a team can take away from the run from Georgia? We know they're a point of attack team. They've invested so much in that offensive line. But, man, if a defensive front can eliminate that, get some hits in the backfield, they have to turn to the quarterback. And right now they just don't seem to have the ability to move the ball perfectly down the field through the air. The other thing that stands out to me, Cooper, over the weekend, and I know this is kind of the nitty-gritty, but how about Georgia? They extended an offer to quarterback Camario Taylor, a Mississippi commit. He's one of the freakiest signal callers in the 2025 cycle. I don't know, to me, that just kind of signals we haven't seen Georgia go after that type of athlete at the quarterback position. And I know maybe it's just a coincidence that Camario gets offered after the game against Ole Miss, but to me, he's someone that can provide a little bit of spark, much like Jalen Milroe does with his legs there at Alabama. I do agree with you. I think Georgia is going to be in that transfer portal market. I'll say this, though. They've never really been interested in the high price tag quarterbacks. They seem to be looking for more of a value brand. Interested to see what that market's going to look like when we get to December, right? That transfer portal window opens up. Where do they kind of target? Let's also not forget they had Jaden Maeva at one point committed, who's now at USC, set to take over for Miller Moss.
I think they would have loved to have him. Speaking of Miller Moss, we'll see what happens at USC, but Miller Moss is kind of a name, Drew, like if you're looking forward into the portal market. If he were to get into the portal, I think he kind of fits Georgia, what they want to do. Connor Wigman's another guy as well. It's going to be one of those guys that they trust from the pocket, just makes things go. But does that make you any better than what you had in Carson Beck? I think that's a question that Georgia has to ask going into this offseason. Drew, let's talk about Ole Miss. And before we talk about Ole Miss, the national title contender here, got to give some love to Austin Simmons, man. The redshirt freshman, we talk about a double classification. This guy comes in after Jackson Dart gets banged up on the first drive. How does he respond? 5 of 6, 64 yards, leads Ole Miss on a scoring drive. I think there are a lot of people looking at that drive and saying, who the heck is Austin Simmons? Lane Kiffin alluded to it after the game. Very excited that he'll be back for another year there, man. But I have to bring it up because we talked about it earlier in the season. Austin Simmons is one of those dudes. Like, if you're a fan in Oxford, you got to be pretty jacked up about this guy, especially after what you saw this weekend.
Cooper, it's funny. We talked about backup quarterback situations for college football playoff contenders a few weeks ago. I wrote about it on CBSSports.com in the talent tracker, kind of like, all right, who is in position to succeed? And we never talked about Ole Miss. And I think with the new reality with the 12-team playoff, hey, you get 2 losses. We need to recalibrate our expectations. They're still very much in play. Lane Kiffin, biggest win of his career. And, you look at this team top to bottom. Yes, they pushed all their chips in. This is the year for the Rebels to break through. And, man, they got this quarterback here, Austin Simmons. I think most people would have assumed this is a weakness. Okay, Jackson Dart goes down, and it looked pretty bad. Ankle was all taped up. He was in the medical tent. Austin Simmons comes in and leads a touchdown drive. To me, this was a complete performance for the Rebels, Cooper. So many of those transfer portal additions just came up big at key moments. And they get the job done. So I think with, again, this new playoff, we got to kind of reimagine how we view these teams as the seasons progress. You want to be playing your best football down the stretch heading into the playoff. And right now, I think you can make Ole Miss, a lot of new faces. They're finally gelling together as a team. And I think that makes them scary in November and December.
Yeah, it's more similar to the NFL. I think you and I talked about that, and you just brought up that point about Ole Miss seems to be hitting their stride right now. And you look at the 2 lost teams in the country, Drew. You got Ole Miss, you got Alabama, Georgia. We just saw the head-to-head against UGA. Ole Miss is one of those teams I would not want to play right now. I mean, if you're looking at the top of the board here between Oregon, Ohio State, teams like Texas, I would not want to face up with Ole Miss because we saw what Ole Miss did in that front seven, the issues that they caused for Georgia in that offensive line. Ole Miss, especially, you mentioned it, invested Walter Nolan, Princely Umanmiel, and Chris Paul coming over from Arkansas. Drew, they are tenacious up front. You look back on a couple games, wish they could have had the Kentucky game back, the LSU game, a play here or there. They probably win that game, right? So Ole Miss, one of those 2 lost teams, if they get in, buyer beware and watch out, Drew. But any other thoughts just on Ole Miss in terms of where they could go this season, how high their ceiling is? Are you buying that they might be a legitimate title contender?
I am, because I think they're playing their best football right now. We'll see how the next few weeks go. And I think Austin Simmons, right, what we saw from him, me and you, I talked about him in the past. Okay, he can really spin the football, and it was just funny to see the reaction, the velocity. I do think that they are a legitimate contender in there and a team to keep an eye on moving forward.
All right, let's talk a little bit about LSU, Alabama. A lot of expectations coming in this game. Top 15 matchup. You had number 11 Alabama, number 15 LSU. Drew, this kind of going into this game, this matchup was a college football playoff eliminator. Whoever got that third loss was going to be well on the outside looking in. That ends up being LSU, Drew. And this was probably the most embarrassing loss in Brian Kelly's tenure so far in 3 years in Baton Rouge. They lose this game 42-13. And it was a Jalen Milroe show again, Drew, a career high, 185 yards, 4 scoring runs. And I think the hard part for any LSU fans is it seems like Marcel Reed just kind of broke this team in half. And Jalen Milroe had a performance like this last year. This was kind of the identity that Alabama had going into this game. They established that from the first drive out. Now you're looking at Alabama, similar to the way that we talked about Ole Miss, one of the more talented teams in the country, number 1 roster in the country by the 24/7 Sports Talent Team composite, Drew. They're dangerous. And on the other side of this, you got LSU 6-3. They lose a game in the beginning of the season that they shouldn't have lost to USC. That's 3 straight openers that they've lost under Brian Kelly. And now you're looking up at Alabama, Drew, not even competitive in this game. I got a lot of thoughts about how they got here. But this is going to be a tough one for Brian Kelly and company to kind of bounce back, not only in the short term for what they need to do this season, but if you zoom out from 30,000 feet as well, it doesn't look good either.
Well, I wanted to ask you this. Yeah, you have thoughts on LSU. Do you think the issue is the offense or the defense? Because I think a lot of people are pointing to that defense, Blake Baker, them not able to stop Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe, 14 designed runs. They had to have known that's coming. You look at Alabama's next few games. They got Mercer, Auburn, Oklahoma. They knew they could run Jalen Milroe, and LSU had no answer. But my counter to that, the offense seems pretty one-dimensional back there with Garrett Nussmeier. They don't have a guy that can create some magic in the pocket. And for a team that has two potential day one, day two selections on the offensive line, for that unit to not be able to get it going, it's just a head-scratcher to me. So you tell me, is it the offense, is it the defense, or is it a more broad problem for LSU?
It's all of the above. Offensively, they've struggled this year at times. Defensively, obviously, the last 2 weeks, they haven't been able to stop an athletic quarterback. And then you can go back and think of the start of the unraveling of the Texas A&M game. It was the special teams, Drew, 1 for 4 there in the kicking game as well. So this is a larger issue for LSU. And let's start with the offense, right? You talk about Garrett Nussmeier, Drew, who, if you take the temperature of NFL evaluators, depending on the week, I mean, this guy could go anywhere from a top 20 draft choice in the NFL to maybe he needs to go back to school, right? Then you think about Will Campbell, you think about Emory Jones, they got a redshirt freshman and DJ Chester at center. They haven't been good enough up front. And I do think they are one of the better pass protection units in the country, but they have not been able to run the ball. That is putting everything on a first-year starter, even though he's been in school for 4 years, and Garrett Nussmeier, Drew. And they're too talented at receiver. You think about all these guys that they have, Kyron Lacey, C.J. Daniels, Xavier Thomas, that they haven't got involved. There's a lack of creativity, imagination that I feel like, all right, all the knives have to be out to figure out a way where LSU can be more successful and consistent week to week, play in and play out. That has not been the case. So I think they're going to have to go back to the drawing board after this year. And the thing that always came to mind for me, Drew, is that when they had a running quarterback in Jaden Daniels, that they were forced to really kind of take in year one under Brian Kelly. And the reason that I say that is because they wanted somebody to come in and compete with young Garrett Nussmeier. You think about how it changed LSU from an ability to defend them. They were a nightmare. Yeah, sure, they had Brian Thomas Jr., sure, they had Malik Neighbors, sure, they had all these weapons, but Jaden Daniels' legs, and I get it, we're talking about the Heisman Trophy winner and a top 5 pick, totally changed this offense in terms of what these guys were capable of and how you defended them. They're not good enough to be a one-dimensional team. So I think they're going to have to go back to the drawing board there offensively. And then defensively, Drew, I think the most damning thing that you can look at, and Brian Kelly's 3 years, okay, the transition cycle in 2022, and then the 2 cycles in 23 and 24. 3 starters on the defensive side of the ball. That's all that's netted. I mean, you look at Harold Perkins, Whit Weeks, Ashton Stamps is another guy that I thought they kind of reached on, and it's kind of been baptism by fire. Drew, the biggest mistake that Brian Kelly made was hiring his defensive staff in his first year. Guess who was already on the staff when he got there? Corey Raymond, who he then hired back 2 years later, and Blake Baker, who he hired back 2 years later from Missouri, right? And I get it. Things happen. You get the job. You want to bring your people in. But you talk about a guy that has never worked in the SEC. To me, that's Brian Kelly. He's going through it right now. This is like a president going into their second term, and they see where they've failed in their first term. Now, the second term, they got to get it right. Now, here's the biggest difference. You don't get 4 years for every term in the SEC as a college football coach. He's on a 10-year contract for $95 million. The thing that I do think he has right, and if you're an LSU fan, maybe you can find some solace in today, you got Bo Davis. That's the right guy. You got Blake Baker. That's the right guy. You got Corey Raymond. That's the right guy. Corey Raymond's recruiting his tail off. Blake Baker's doing a heck of a job, too. Defensively, they need to see an uptick. It's got to be more Dominic McKinley, more Jakeem Stewart. It's got to be more of those big bodies. They got to find a way to get involved, and they got to take a piece of what Ole Miss did this offseason, and they have to completely flip the script on their front seven to become one of the better units in the country. Right now, from a talent standpoint, they're not up to snuff, not even close defensively. They got to get better on the interior, both sides of the line of scrimmage. They got their work cut out for them. They have the right people there. But that alignment from Scott Woodward to Austin Thomas to Brian Kelly, I mean, that thing's got to be clicking. It's got to be humming. And the same with the money stuff as well. It's got to be there. You got to know who to spend your money on. And, Drew, the first 2 years, the decisions that Brian Kelly made has set them back another 2 years. So if you're an LSU fan, year 4, you got to see an uptick. Year 5, you got to see an uptick. But, yeah, if I'm an LSU fan, I'm discouraged. This is not where they should be in year 3. And granted, he probably exceeded expectations in the first 2 years, but this is the year to make the jump. The more discouraging thing is these are his guys now, and they're not getting it done. In the first 2 years, it was somebody else's. So I know that was a long rant talking about LSU, Drew, but obviously a lot to be said there. Guys, we talked about it, the SEC, it just keeps humming. We got Billy Napier reaction coming back for another year in Gainesville right after this. Stick with us. Welcome back to the 105. We got some news late last week from Florida AD Scott Strickland. Drew, guess who's back? Billy Napier's back for 2025. You and I have talked about this a lot. Will he stay or will he go? How they responded over the weekend, Drew, maybe a little disappointing as they got romped by Texas in Austin. Florida absolutely decimated by injuries right now. DJ Lagway, game time decision. He couldn't go. That has a lot to do with it as well, Drew. Here's a resume. Billy Napier now 15-19 with Florida. Close losses this year to Tennessee, in Georgia, something you can hang your hat on. The next three, LSU, Ole Miss at home. Then you're on the road in Tallahassee at Florida State. Drew, as somebody who follows the program pretty closely, I guess just your initial response on Billy Napier being back for another year in Gainesville.
Well, are we sure he's for sure going to be the guy in 2025? I mean, it just was a vote of confidence. I don't think it was an extension of any sorts. But hey, Scott Strickland had to do this. If you look at Florida and what they're doing on the recruiting front, Cooper, they've been a bit handcuffed by the fan base here, really, for the past 6-8 months. I mean, Billy Napier has been on this hot seat. It's looming. All right, is he going to be the head coach? And I think it has really affected them from a talent acquisition standpoint. The other reason why they have to put this statement out there, you don't think there's other schools around the country that are tampering with some of that young talent on Florida's roster? I mean, how many times have you heard from college personnel, oh man, DJ Lagway's the guy. DJ Lagway, he was ready to go. You know, there's some quarterback needy teams out there that are putting some feelers out on DJ Lagway. You got Jaden Ball, the freshman running back as well, a really talented young front seven. So they had to make some type of statement. And I think, you know, them being able to do that, you've already seen it a little bit. Florida, you know, looks like they're going to flip a quarterback from Florida State. And I think what is really just hurting Billy is, you know, this recruiting class could have been much like it was the past two cycles, but now they're likely going to finish outside the top 25. So my reaction, they had to do something. I don't think it means for sure he's going to be the coach in 2025, but I do like the young core. And I think it's also notable, Cooper, Florida continues to play hard under Billy Napier, even with all those injuries.
Yeah, Scott Strickland, I think, needed this more than Billy Napier needed this. Scott Strickland is directly tied to Billy Napier, and you kind of brought up the point. I'll play devil's advocate on this. LSU, Ole Miss, DJ Lagway more than likely back this weekend. That would be my guess against LSU. LSU, who just got dominated by Alabama. If LSU goes in there in Gainesville, wins convincingly, and then Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin come in there the next weekend, they do the same thing. And then, okay, they beat a one-win Florida State team. How much confidence then do you have in Billy Napier going forward? I can see like pitchforks out, 5-7 team. Drew, this not ending well in Gainesville and that being an option. But here's my question to you. Like, what is best case scenario here with less than 30 days until National Signing Day for Florida? Not, hey, is it they're going to sign player X or player Y, but like, what's the best case scenario for Billy Napier, this Gator staff here over the next couple months? Because you know they're going to evaluate things from both of their coordinator spots going into next year. What would make you feel better about Billy Napier in Florida going into 2025?
I think you got to be competitive against LSU, and you got to be competitive against Ole Miss. The Texas game is a difficult spot. I mean, they got a walk-on former Yale quarterback starting there against a Longhorn squad, which was well rested and ready to go coming off a bye week. I think anyone that thought Florida was going to go out there and turn heads wasn't seeing that the right way. For me, Florida, if they can get to a bowl game, I think it would go a long, long way. But it's getting DJ Lagway back involved on offense. It's DJ Lagway looking the part and continuing to be the building block for the future of the program. I think the other thing, too, Cooper, is they have to work on not only player retention, but some recruiting class retention. Florida's got some nice blue chip kids committed. Ben Hanks, the cornerback, Vernell Brown, the wide receiver, both in-state legacy recruits, both ones that other programs want. Billy Napier needs to hold on to them. So I think the biggest thing is looking competitive here over the next month, getting through signing day, holding on to those pieces, and then kind of resetting in January after that transfer portal window.
I agree with the point that you made with Florida from not having the vote of confidence going into the season from maybe the administration. I also think that I understand where the administration's coming from, right? Just in terms of what we've seen from Billy Napier and his team through those first 2 years and kind of what it looks like. Here's my frustration. If you're Billy Napier and you're in Florida, you're sitting at 50 right now, regardless of your situation. If you're 1-9, I'd say the same thing about Mike Norvell. We had a situation like this when we were at Michigan back in 2017. We missed out on every top target that you could possibly imagine. And a lot of that had to do with our coaches' heads being in the clouds by a wide margin. Florida's a brand program, Drew, that I think that there is a lot of players out there, prospects out there, good ones. Yeah, maybe they not be the cream of the crop, and you can push back and say NIL, but you should have a deep and thorough board in the state of Florida. How often do you and I always talk about USF or Central Florida or one of these guys or Illinois recruiting these guys out of the Sunshine State that go on to go be all conference or winnable plus type players somewhere else? They should have more to stand on right now than what they have on. And I think that's kind of inexcusable. I think they should be closer to a top 25 class. For the first time in the Billy Napier era, I think they kind of took their foot off the gas pedal on the high school side, and we'll see how they can finish here on the next 30 days. But that's a little bit of a concern to me. Let's talk about kind of a head-to-head and a unique situation here when you're talking about Florida and Florida State, because on the other side of this, you got a Florida State team, Drew. They're 1-9. They're in completely uncharted waters right now that they haven't been in maybe 40 years, right, with the program. 32 in 26 under Mike Norvell. They have the 31 ranked recruiting class. If you're just looking at this as an observer, objectively, like who do you have more stock in to potentially figure this out? Is it Billy Napier or is it Mike Norvell?
I think it's Florida. And again, it starts with DJ Lagway, the quarterback, but I do think on defense, there's some good young pieces. You got LJ McCray, the former 5-star. You got TJ Searcy, Kelby Collins, Cam James, like what I've seen from him. I think the other thing, the culture there in Gainesville, you know, kind of look around the state, it's been a rough year for the Sunshine State. A lot of the FBS programs are struggling, but again, Florida's playing hard, right? I think Billy Napier needs some credit for getting the guys he wants in the building. They are competitive in certain stretches, and they've gotten better and better as the season has progressed, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Now, they might not have the personnel. I think any team in the country, right, you take away the top 3 corners, it's going to be a bit of an adventure in your secondary. That's just the nature of the beast. So to me, it's Florida. And Cooper, I had an interesting text message that came out through my phone this morning about Florida State. You know, so someone pointed out, hey, I don't see how Florida State gets out of this hole. And right, Mike Norvell is parted ways with his coordinators. I just think what they're going to have to do in terms of a roster construction here in the month of December is going to be fascinating. They, too, haven't done much on the high school recruiting front. They've lost a lot of their top prospects. But I think with how things go in the transfer portal. I mean, you look at Florida State against Notre Dame, it was a lifeless sideline. I could see a lot of guys in that current roster leaving, and how do you replace them? Remember, you only got 15 days. Who do you go after? Is it group of 5 guys? Is it power 4 guys looking for a new chance? So I think for Florida State, just this offseason will be one of the most interesting ever, not only for them, but just anyone in the country. We've never seen anything like this.
It's a case study. It kind of feels like, right? And they did fire both coordinators along with the receiver coach, Alex Atkins, Adam Fuller, 2 guys that have been with Mike Norvell for quite some time. I think you and I kind of struggled, like, what do you even do if you're Mike Norvell at this point? Obviously, you got to get the right guys in there from a play calling standpoint. That's the bare minimum of what needs to be done. But what does the portal look like? What does the next 30 days on the high school side look like for Florida State? Drew, another interesting kind of conversation you and I were having, like, how do you really even evaluate Luke Kromenhawk in this position, the former top 247 quarterback? How do you evaluate a Brock Glenn? Like, is it even fair? You kind of talked about, like, you threw Pat Mahomes back there behind that offensive line and gave him that type of skill talent. He would probably struggle in that spot again in South Bend as well this weekend. That's going to be the biggest, I would say, misconception around some of these guys at quarterback is this is a really muddied evaluation where these guys were kind of brought in a position not to succeed. So do you just cast aside a Croman Hawk or a Brock Glenn and say, hey, we're going to start from scratch? Or is there something redeemable about either of those two guys?
Well, they could lose both of them to the transfer portal. And then what are you going to do? We mentioned Tramel Jones, their high school quarterback commit. It looks like he might flip over there to Florida. I mean, Mike Norvell is going to be in a very, very interesting spot. And again, I don't want to keep bringing this up, but that transfer portal, that 15-day window, you're making decisions in the snap of the finger. You got to be ready to go. And Mike Norvell is going to be trying to hire a new offensive coordinator, a new defensive coordinator. We evaluate players all the time. The more you speed that process up, the more you are leaving, the wider the margin for error really is. So, yeah, I mean, Florida State, Luke Kromenhoek, we never thought he was going to be ready to go year one. I mean, that was never anywhere in our scouting reports. Hey, we love what this guy can be. But now you put him behind an offensive line that can't block anyone. Wide receivers that can't catch a pass. Florida State leads the nation in drops. I mean, no one is going to look good in that situation.
Yeah, and this is really where it comes to a head, but you got to have a solid front office. Right now, all that work is being done. It's already been done in terms of advanced scouting, looking at guys that could enter the portal, having those conversations already, and then Drew, the financial component, good luck with that. That's going to be a lot of fun. All right, we got Freshman Flowers coming up next. Stick around. Welcome back to the 105. Now time for Freshman Flowers, where we give our bouquet or awards to the freshmen that have been balling week to week. Andrew, who better to start with than Jeremiah Smith? This is like a culmination of like bouquets that we're going to give to Mr. Smith here, man. Another week, another solid performance, 6 receptions, 87 yards and a touchdown, even though some might look at that and say, hey, that's just another walk in the park for Jeremiah Smith. Here's the thing, 45 receptions, 765 yards, 9 touchdowns for the number 1 player in the country, number 1 receiver. He also breaks Chris Carter's record for most touchdown catches for a freshman in Ohio State history. Drew, think of all the names that have come out of Ohio State at the receiver position. Garrett Wilson, you think of other guys in the past as well. Chris Olave comes to mind, and the list kind of goes on and on, Drew. Jeremiah Smith, a spectacle. You and I, the rest of the scouting group, went back and forth. Is he the number 1 player in the country? Can we put a receiver there? Should we compare him to Julio Jones? Yes, yes, and yes. And Drew, what has he done? I think just proved us right the entire way.
Cooper, we don't even consider him a freshman anymore, right? It's just like everyone's immune to it. This is Jeremiah Smith. The hype's all gone. He's expected to do it. He shows up to work, punches the ticket, and then he goes home for the day. It's going to be fun to, I think, just watch this entire career and see how it culminates, right? I mean, he legitimately could go number 1 one day in the NFL draft. You forgot Marvin Harrison Jr. when you were mentioning all those wide receivers. He's on schedule. I'd also say he's ahead of schedule. Didn't we at the beginning of the season kind of go back and forth about whether or not he was going to lead Ohio State in receiving yards? I think you took yes. I said no, and now I'm looking like the fool up here.
I think you've always had a little bit of like, is it too good to be true with Jeremiah Smith? Like I said, I always bring it up. You've seen him since he was a youngin', and because you're so close, it almost feels like you kind of have to hedge your bet. To those of us who get the snapshot of him, you're like, yeah, this guy is legit, and he's proved that this year. So Jeremiah Smith, well done. A bouquet for you, my friend. You've been balling out all year, and we can continue to expect great things from him. All right, Drew, who you got, Freshman Flowers?
I'm going from a 5-star to a 3-star prospect, right? 3 stars are people too. We say that all the time. And man, this kid came up big on Saturday for Georgia Tech. Aaron Philo, the quarterback, Haynes King, dinged up, couldn't throw the football. Aaron Philo came in situationally for Georgia Tech in the upset of Miami. And man, he converted some big 3rd downs. In the first quarter, it was a 3rd and 9. He runs for 12 yards. In the 3rd quarter, 3rd and 9, 15-yard touchdown pass. In the 4th quarter, 3rd and 18. Converts it with a 27-yard reception over the middle. That sets up another score. And then late in the game, 3rd and 8, he gets it done, allows Georgia Tech to kill some clock. Aaron Philo, number 47 quarterback for us in the class of 2024. Cooper, he's Georgia's all-time leading passer in high school, ahead of Trevor Lawrence, broke that record there as a senior. We mentioned it on the 105. We're kind of going around the country and evaluating these recruiting classes. And when we talked about Georgia Tech, when we got to their class, number one, it's a sneaky good group. Really, really like what they got going on there. The other thing is Buster Faulkner, the OC there, he continues to stockpile talent at the quarterback position. Aaron Philo, man, him stepping up in those key moments was huge. It led to that upset. And I just think, he deserves plenty of flowers for his play.
Yeah, and we talked about this in pre-production, but any of these names, Buster Faulkner, one of those names at the offensive coordinator spot, Santucci on the defensive side of the ball for Brent Key, who we got to give a ton of credit to for the job that he's done at Georgia Tech. And obviously that first one of the season against Florida State. But those are two names to keep in mind. And I think Georgia Tech is going to do everything in their power to keep those guys in the boat. But Drew, not even a sneaky good class, like just a good class for Georgia Tech and what they got coming in. All right, Drew, I'm going to go back to the SEC. I'm going to go with Boo Carter. And this is a guy that I think you and I just kind of struggled a little bit. Is he going to be on offense? Is he going to be on defense? Eventually ends up Rocky Top playing nickel for them. And he had himself a game against Mississippi State, 35 snaps. He had a grade from PFF of 80 in coverage. He also had 2 tackles, INT as well, and then another TFL. So Drew, this kid, Mr. Versatility, I think we always thought, okay, nickel would be a good home for him. Love the suddenness, but he is a playmaker, man. You see the way that he plays the position. We talk about it a lot. If you're going to be undersized and you're going to be a defender, especially if a guy that cannot play on the perimeter, then you got to have the goods, especially if you're going to play nickel. You can play match coverage. The football instincts jump off the tape when you watch Boo Carter, and that's something you learn a lot from when you watch guys that dominated throughout their high school career in all 3 phases. That's exactly what Boo Carter is. They got a good one, all-conference type of player here at Boo Carter.
Yeah, finishes our number 5 athlete. Kind of think we wish we could have got him a little bit higher up the board. Hey, he was invited to the All-American Bowl there in San Antonio, wasn't able to participate because he was going through bowl practices with the Vols. He looks like a good one for them. Tim Banks continues to get it done on the defensive side of the ball. I don't know if you've seen the alignment for Boo Carter where he's kind of played for Tennessee on defense. They use him everywhere. He is a chess piece. Really cool to see. Cuba, I'm going to go with another second-level defender here. My number 1 freak from last year, Sammy Brown, Clemson linebacker, gets his first career start for the Tigers on the road at Virginia Tech, leads the team in tackles. And really the big note here, Virginia Tech was averaging over 200 yards on the ground per game. Clemson limits them to just under 40 yards on 21 carries. Brown, 8 tackles. He also had a key sack there in the second half. Cooper, what I really love about this is I was watching a post-game interview of Sammy Brown, and I know you've spent some time around him. Tells reporters right at the end of the interview, he's like, hey, Enter Sandman, really good song. I'm like, this is the Sammy Brown I know. Like, that's the guy that's going to make the comment. Enter Sandman, really good song, and his first career start in the ACC.
I mean, I think the player comp was like Brian Bosworth, right? And a lot of that had to do with the hair, but I'm not shocked by that for the Enter Sandman compliment. All right, Drew, before we go to the next segment, we got to give some love to Cash Cleveland, the walk-on from IMG Academy, starting at center for Colorado. His old teammate Jordan Seaton, he played next to him. He played well this week. And Elijah Thurman, another guy that we really liked, who we thought was going to be an interior guy. That's probably still his future home. Had to step up, play tackle this weekend for Clemson in their big win over Virginia Tech. There you have it. The freshman flowers, guys, stick around. Got some recruiting scoop coming up next. Welcome back to the 105. Time for some blue chip recruiting scoop. And Drew, it's silly season, as you always like to say. We are less than 30 days out from National Signing Day. So that means all bets are off, right? And let's get right into it from our friend Tom Loyes. He's got some crystal balls rolling in from over the weekend. And let's start with five-star receiver Caleb Cunningham from Choctaw County, Mississippi, currently committed to the Alabama Crimson Tide. But that crystal ball has now flipped to Ole Miss. Drew, what do you think about this number 3 receiver in the country potentially staying home?
He was in Oxford in the rain there. I think this could be huge for Ole Miss. We continue to bring it up, right? What do the Rebels look like in 2025? They are so senior and veteran heavy. There's going to be an opportunity for someone to catch the football. Yeah, Caden Lee's going to come back, Honeycomb, but Caleb Cunningham, to me, in-state prospect, this would be a monster win for Lane Kiffin. And I think he's a guy that could step in the SEC and produce, given what he does running after the catch, right? I call him a rack menace. I think this is a big one for Ole Miss, and it would be a blow for Alabama. We're still kind of trying to figure out, all right, what is Caleb Cunningham? Is he another Jeremiah Smith? Is he another Ryan Williams? I think we'll have a better idea after the All-Star games. But given where things stand right now, all the data points, we really, really like him. And Ole Miss, it would be a monster addition.
Alabama's traditionally had success under Nick Saban, especially in the state of Mississippi. I think what Kalen DeBoer, Courtney Morgan are going to find out, Mississippi's a different beast. It doesn't matter who you are going into there to try to recruit those guys. Ole Miss, especially the way that they're playing, it's going to be pretty tough. Drew, another little footnote here. Deuce Knight, top 50 player in the country, visited Ole Miss over the weekend, currently committed to Auburn, went back and forth, is going to end up Notre Dame, Auburn. You have Ole Miss just kind of like buzzing around, staying in his ear there. That's significant. Yeah, you got Austin Simmons, but you look at that room and you kind of look like at a path to the field, and it kind of makes a sense if you view the player as a guy that needs to develop, that Ole Miss is kind of a good fit for Deuce Knight.
Hey, and Austin Simmons a lefty, Deuce Knight a lefty, makes practice a little bit easier for Lane Kiffin, right, to run both those guys. Yeah, I would keep an eye on that one. Didn't I say it last week on the 105? Hey, there's going to be one top 10 quarterback flip we're not really talking about. I didn't think it was Deuce Knight going from Notre Dame to Auburn, but something to keep an eye on here down the stretch, Deuce Knight.
All right, let's talk about one of these big tackles still out there. Lamont Rogers, committed to Missouri, 5-star offensive tackle, number 27 player overall, top 6 tackle in the country. Drew, there's been, since we named him a 5, there's been some murmurs that Texas A&M could be the team ultimately at the end of the day that nabs Lamont Rogers. That crystal ball is now in from Tom Loy as well, going from Missouri to A&M. What do you think this would mean for the Aggies if they were able to get this one done?
Left tackle of the future. Love this guy. Can't wait to see him in San Antonio at Navy's All-American Bowl. You turn on the tape, and, man, he just swallows people up on the corner. Extremely athletic. I love how he shoots out of his stance, Cooper. I think for Texas Tech, it feels like we're running the recruiting department, given kind of some of these guys that they go after. For Missouri, it would be quite the blow for them. I mean, this is a guy, they went into the Lone Star State, got him committed, kind of the one that's going to protect their quarterback commit, Matt Zollers. I don't know. I think for Texas A&M, everything I've heard, they seem to be in a good spot.
Yeah, big one developing there with Lamont Rogers. We'll see what happens. Missouri, obviously going to do anything they can to hold on to him. All right, Drew, let's talk about the elephant in the room, maybe quite literally. Ivan Taylor, top 50 prospect, maybe your favorite prospect on the entire board. The crystal ball is now in for a flip from Michigan to Alabama. How would you like that fit there in Tuscaloosa?
I love it. I mean, high IQ. I think he's one of the prospects with the highest floors in the entire cycle. I said, Cooper, I mean, maybe I'm seeing this wrong, but he just checks off box after box after box for me. He can defend the pass. He can defend the run. He can create turnovers. For Alabama, this would be a nice addition given the fact that they're going to lose Malachi Moore, right? They still need to shore up that secondary. I think Ivan Taylor has a chance to come in and make an impact in year one. Now, is he as good as Caleb Downs? Give me a little bit after we get to the All-Star season, and then I'll let you know if I think he's going to be an all-SEC type of talent. But this is Ike Taylor's kid, right? A kid that has been around the game. He can see it better than so many others. Really, really polished. I think he's ready to go, and for the Crimson Tide would be a nice addition as well.
All right, I want to make sure we hit this one, so we're a little out of order here. How about Julian Lewis, the crystal ball now in from USC to Colorado? We talked about it a little bit. Top 120 player in the country, top 10 quarterback as well, Drew. Reclassification, you talk about just a pure winner and distributor. What's it look like after Shedeur Sanders? Maybe Colorado Deion Sanders has his answer here.
It's going to sound weird given where he's ranked, Cooper. I think this guy, out of all these quarterbacks, might be the most ready to go, just kind of given his skill set. He is a point guard back there. He's done it at Carrollton High School in Georgia's highest classification. It would be a key piece, I think, to the future for Colorado because they don't have another quarterback on the roster that's thrown a pass in a buff uniform, right? They haven't used anyone else. So Julian Lewis could be the guy. I don't know. What do you think of the fit there and what that would mean for Deion Sanders in 2025 and beyond?
Love it. You see 8 quarterbacks ranked ahead of Julian Lewis, and you got to remember our rankings go back to Sunday potential. Julian Lewis, in terms of a Saturday quarterback, is exactly what you want and what you need if you're Deion Sanders, especially after Shedeur goes off to the NFL. I mean, you talk about engagement, right? Colorado's 7-2, trying to ramp up their effort for a playoff bid here. This is a perfect bridge to go from Shedeur to Julian Lewis, who's ready to play and going to play in a pro-style offense under Pat Shurmur. Drew, one more here. I want to get your opinion on this. Grayson Littleton, a guy that we've been tracking for quite some time, was committed to Clemson, top 100 prospect, one of the best nickel corners in the country, but it seems like Texas is emerging for him. What do you think about that one?
I think this is a bad trend for Florida's Big Three. Look, ever since the Longhorns have moved into the SEC, they've found a ton of success recruiting the state of Florida. Cooper, I've been doing this for a long time. I don't ever really remember Texas kind of coming in and going after some of the top prospects in the Sunshine State. Now they're in it for Grayson Littleton. Remember, they got Cedric Baxter, our number 2 ranked running back a few cycles ago. Jamie French, top 247 wide receiver out of Jacksonville. He's committed. Jarrett Gibson over the weekend, Gainesville native, runs for 100 yards against the Gators. They got Dia Bell committed in 2026. I think if I'm Florida State, Miami, I'm concerned about Steve Sarkisian and them just kind of getting into the area and trying to take some of the best players that are available.
All right, final thoughts and official visits for everyone coming up next. Stick around. Welcome back to the 105, Drew. The NCAA is back at it again, and guess what? This time, no more official visits, or guess what? Official visits for everybody is really kind of what I mean. At the request of the Division I Football Subdivision Oversight Committee, the NCAA staff issued a blanket waiver suspending the school limit on the number of official recruiting visits available to FBS members hosting prospective student athletes. There's a statement right there, Drew. That means that you can have over 70 OVs, which is kind of crazy. I mean, this puts an immense amount of stress, pressure, especially once the transfer portal opens, not to mention the calendar is already pretty bananas. Any thoughts on this, or do you think it moves the needle one way or the other?
I've heard from a few different college staffers that this was kind of wanted, and the reason why they're so taxed with these counters, with these transfer visits, right? During that 15-day window, I mean, schools will host guys every single day. You're bringing in a new transfer. So I don't think it changes much. This is really just kind of something that needed to change. Who knows what that number is eventually going to be, but I do know a few different programs out there were kind of hoping for this. My thing is, like, the rich are going to get richer, right? Not every program is going to be able to afford to host 100 different guys, right? Some of them don't have that type of budget. You would know. I mean, hey, you used to schedule these type of things, right?
It's a lot. I think it really kind of depends on your staff size a little bit and the people that you have in the building. Can they handle this? Can they handle this type of stress and duress? And what's the philosophy of your head coach as well, Drew? The other news that I wanted to get to, and I might have to riff on this a little bit as well. Nebraska making a change at the offensive coordinator spot. Marcus Satterfield out, Dana Holgorsen in, former head coach of Houston. Drew, a quick change there in Nebraska. You never know. Things can happen, but a 5-star quarterback and a coordinator change already. Just saying, something to look out for, right? Look at that with Dante Moore and UCLA. Guys, we appreciate you joining us as always. And just a reminder, you can find the 105 every Monday and Wednesday. Monday, 2 o'clock Eastern on CBS Sports Network, and Wednesday, 1 o'clock on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel and wherever you find your podcast. For Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.